As he puts it, by shutting down the systems that see the homeless person as a fellow human. One doesn't have to experience the unpleasant pressures of feeling bad about not giving money. In other words, the homeless have become dehumanized. The brain is viewing them more like objects and less like people. Not surprisingly, one is less likely to treat them with consideration. As Harris explains, if you don't properly diagnose people as human beings, then the moral rules that are reserved for human people may not apply. Dehumanization is a key component of genocide. Just as the Nazis viewed the Jews as something less than human, the Serbs in former Yugoslavia viewed the Muslims this way. When I was in Sarajevo, I walked along the main street. During the war, it became known as Snipper's Alley because civilian men, women, and children were killed by riflemen crouched in the surrounding hillsides and neighboring buildings. This street became one of the most powerful symbols of the hero of the war. How does a normal city street come to that? This war, like all others, was fueled by an effective form of neural manipulation, one that's been practiced for centuries, propaganda. During the Yugoslav war, the main news network, Radio Television of Serbia, was controlled by the Serb government and constantly presented distorted news stories as factual. The network made up reports of ethnical motivated attacks by Bosnian Muslims and Croats against the Serb people. They continually demonized Bosnians and Croatians and used negative language in their descriptions of Muslims. At the height of bizarreness, the network broadcast an unfounded story that Muslims were feeding Serbian children to the hungry lions of the Sarajevo Zoo. Genocide is only possible when dehumanization happens on a massive scale, and the perfect tool for the job is propaganda. It keys right into the neural networks that understand other people and dials down the degree to which we empathize with them. We have seen that our brain can be manipulated by political agendas to dehumanize other people, which can then lead to the darkest side of human acts. But is it possible to program our brains to prevent this? One possible solution lies in a 1960s experiment that was conducted not in a science lab, but in a school. It was 1968, the day after the assassination of civil rights leader Martin Luther King. Jane Elliott, a teacher in a small town in Lua, decided to demonstrate to her class what prejudice was about. Jane asked her class whether they knew how it would feel to be judged by the color of their skin. The students mostly thought they could, but she wasn't so sure, so she launched what was destined to become a famous experiment. She announced that the blue-eyed people were the better people in this room. Jane Elliott: the brown-eyed people do not get to use the drinking fountain. You'll have to use the paper cups. You brown-eyed people are not to play with the blue-eyed people on the playground because you are not as good as blue-eyed people. The brown-eyed people in this room today are going to wear colors so that we can tell from a distance what colors your eyes are. On page 127, is everyone ready? Everyone but Lori. Ready, Lori? Child: she's a brown eye. Jane: she's a brown eye. You will begin to notice today that we spend a great deal of time waiting for brown-eyed people. A moment later, Jane looks around for her yardstick, and two boys pipe up. Rex points out to her where the yardstick is, and Raymond helpfully offers, "Hey, Mrs. Elliott, you better keep that on your desk so if the brown-eyed people get out of hand." I recently sat down with those two boys. Now grown men, Rex Kozak and Ray Hansen, they both have blue eyes. I asked them if they remembered what their behavior was like on that day. Ray reported that I was tremendously evil to my friends. I was going out of my way to pick on my brown-eyed friends for the sake of my own promotion. He recalled that at that time his hair was quite blonde and his eyes were quite blue, and I was the perfect little Nazi. I looked for ways to be mean to my friends, who minutes or hours earlier had been very close to me. The next day, Jane reserved the experiment. She announced to the class, "The brown-eyed people may take off their collars, and each of you may put your collar on a blue-eyed person. The brown-eyed people get 5 extra minutes of recess. The blue-eyed people are not allowed to be on the playground equipment at any time. You blue-eyed people are not to play with the brown-eyed people. Brown-eyed people are better than blue-eyed people." Rex described what the reversal was like. It takes your word and shatters it like you have never had your word shattered before. When Ray was in the down group, he felt such a deep sense of loss, of personality, and of self, that he felt it was almost impossible to function. One of the most important things we learn as humans is perspective taking, and children don't typically get a meaningful exercise in that. When one is forced to understand what it's like to stand in someone else's shoes, it opens up new cognitive pathways. After the exercise in Mrs. Elliott's classroom, Rex was more vigilant against racist statements. He remembers telling his father, "That's not appropriate." Rex remembers that moment fondly. He felt affirmed by it, and he knew he'd begun to change as a person. The brilliance of the blue eyes, brown eyes exercise was that Jane Elliott switched which group was on top, that allowed the children to extract a larger lesson. Systems of rules can be arbitrary. The children learned that the truths of the world aren't fixed, and moreover, they are not necessarily truths. This exercise empowered the children to see through the smoke and mirrors of political agendas and to form their own opinions, surely a skill we would want for all our children. Education plays a key role in preventing genocide, only by understanding the neural drive to form in-groups and out-groups, and the standard trick by which propaganda blocks into this drive. Can we hope to interrupt the paths of dehumanization that end in mass atrocity? In this age of digital hyperlinking, it's more important than ever to understand the links between humans. Human brains are fundamentally wired to interact. We are a splendidly social species. Although our social drives can sometimes be manipulated, they also sit squarely at the center of the human success story. You might assume that you end at the border of your skin, but there is a sense in which there is no way to mark the end of you and the beginning of all those around you. Your neurons and those of everyone on the planet interplay in a giant, shifting superorganism. What we democrate as you is simply a network in a larger network. If you want a bright future for our species, we'll want to continue to research how human brains interact, the dangers as well as the opportunities, because there is no avoiding the truth etched into the wiring of our brains. We need each other.